Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette. We're so glad you're with us today to stay curious on a very special program honoring Columbia spaceship and its astronauts as well as its workers with one of its great workers that's a friend of our museum and the Stay Curious program, Terry White. Hi,
Hey,
Terry.
good afternoon.
Afternoon. Great. Thank you for coming today. This is January 24th, and of course, the tragedies of Apollo 1, uh, Challenger and Columbia being set in the same week, so to speak, creates what has been called NASA's darkest week. But we at the American Space Museum like taking a high road and celebrating the lives of these heroes of ours and wonderful people. But all of the space workers affected by this, I have learned in my 6 years here at the museum, is quite a story in itself. And
It is.
Terry, you're one of the people there that treated the orbiter Columbia as the seventh loss of an entity on there in all true sense of the word, right, my
Yes.
friend?
Yes. Yeah. It was an amazing vehicle, and I worked original build of Columbia when it was in California, and it was really important to us that it was not only the first, but I had a lot of technicians that had 25 years of blood, sweat, and tears in that orbiter, getting it ready for all of its flights and that. And it was really tragic to us when we lost the orbiter and lost the crew. But the people that worked with me were just dedicated to finding out what had happened, recovering the vehicle, and figuring out what we had to do to return to flight. Because the vehicle, we didn't get to see much of the crew. They trained in Houston and they came down here periodically to do some training, but ours was in the vehicle every single day.
We'll show you the couple pictures to get a sense of the intimacy of an orbiter that you clock in, and there's this spaceship that you're working on every day. I did say seven lives were lost, and Columbia is sort of the eighth entity
Yes.
that people talk about in there. Want to, of course, part of the Columbia story is our co-producer Marty Winkle, who worked on the engines that are roaring right off the pad here on this beautiful shot of STS 107. Hi, Marty.
Hello, Mark.
There we are, buddy. 975th show here with this wonderful supporter of ours here. Hard to believe in a way, isn't it? In many ways, it's hard to believe. Born out of the pandemic, March 23rd, 2020, to stay relevant. We didn't know what was going to happen to our country as it shut down. And we wanted to make sure people that contribute to our nonprofit knew that we were not going to just close the doors. We closed for 6 months and reopened. This show was an outlet, and we met people along the way like Dave Stange and Larry Pushkar and Chris Callie, the Tom and Mark Usiak. It's just an amazing journey that we've had with the help of some people like Ken Kramer, Travis Thompson, and others that don't appear regularly on the show, but we were glad that they were there to help us along the way. And we've had your son Travis, your daughter Rebecca on here,
Yes.
grandkids watching your show
Yes.
today.
Yep. They're watching today.
So, and where are they watching from?
They're watching from Baker, Louisiana, which is just north of Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge. So, the debris field that you're going to see going from Texas to Louisiana really came home to you, didn't it?
It did. Yes. And it was something because when we lost the vehicle, they immediately took a team and put them on an aircraft right here at Kennedy Space Center and took them to Texas. So when I got the word that what was happened, I contacted people and I said, well, in the military, I was in a crash recovery. So I said, I know what it's like to search areas like where Columbia went down and that. And so on the following Monday, then I flew on a commercial aircraft out there, and they wanted me at Barksdale Air Force Base where they were going to accumulate all the parts that they picked up and then package them and ship them back to Kennedy Space Center. So that's where I started when I went on the recovery team.
Well, we're going to have Terry give us an overview of the disaster as it unfolded briefly. Then he's going to talk about the deployment of the people out from NASA and other places is kind of incredible, like a whole family going out there to find their loved ones, literally, and the good people that helped them there. And then we'll come full circle with a reunion that was held 20 years ago. We want to let everybody know that we're roaring into January. Gary Allgire's program yesterday on the Apollo 1 fire has over 200 of you looking at that already, and we are blessed to have that kind of numbers in our humble YouTube video podcast. Gary's going to come back Thursday and talk about Challenger. He was a structural engineer. He looks at it from that side of it.
Yeah. Is he going to be at the Apollo 1 ceremony Saturday out at Launch Complex 34?
Not sure, but
Okay.
I am.
Okay.
And you're going to be
Yeah.
a speaker out there, right?
Yeah,
Marty?
I'm
Marty's on the
I'm
bus.
gonna be assisting. So yep.
We got Connie McDaniel going, Marty, Lillian from the museum going here, our new grant writer. So, but yeah, we'll tell you about that Monday too, maybe a little bit about it. But anxious to have Mike Line back on Friday. Mike, of course, is the launch director for over 30 launches. He launched Columbia, then he led the recovery and wrote a book about that. We'll show you a copy of that here in a second, kind of the definitive book, I think, on Columbia. Mike wants your questions and answers, so send them to us by personal message to me or email me at marq@americanSpaceMuseum.org. And Terry actually got some questions from his show that you did last Wednesday, where we did a very successful Q&A with you. So the lineup here this week is strong. Mike Leinbach, been in touch with him. He'll talk about any topic you want to talk about, including Artemis, and everything's open to Mike. If you've been around him, if you don't ask a question, it's your fault.
Yeah, and Mike and I are a lot alike in that if you send us a question, we know what your interest is, and we really like answering your questions. It makes for a better show, a better conversation. I mean, you've learned a few things doing these shows with me, haven't you?
I sure have. And there's some things that you think you know something. And I always say, if I have a gallon of knowledge now, I had about a pint if I was lucky when I moved down here after writing a column for 22 years every week.
Yeah.
I can now spot between the two white tanks, which one's STS-1 and which one's STS-2. Thank you, Tommy Usiak, for pointing that out. And you know what that is, right? I told you that.
Yeah. Yeah.
STS-1 has a black ring at the top of the
black ring, and
tank.
2 doesn't. So.
And Terry's going to show you here in a minute how you can spot Columbia, the matriarch of the fleet, from the other 5 orbiters, just like that. So we got some great programming. Thanks a lot to Marty helping us with this. Our whole team here, led by Karan Conklin. We're working hard to do what we think no one else is doing. No one else is interviewing you on YouTube and asking you about things, or having Jay Honeycutt on, or Mike Leinbach, and my gosh, Gary Allgire. He has been researching what he talks about for decades, because he has had in his mind, what happened if I was in the capsule of Apollo 1? What happened if I was in a Challenger? Which our collections manager, Nick Enix, said to me today. He said, you're going to straighten people out. Challenger did not explode.
Correct.
It crashed into the external tank.
Yeah, the tank exploded and it took the orbiter out.
The orbiter did not explode. It actually, the strut was sawed off like a torch coincidentally by the SRB. We'll talk about that with Gary tomorrow. We're talking about Columbia today. And this is one of the most moving tributes I've seen about anything. The actual famous piece of Challenger on the left, the windscreen of Columbia on the right.
Yeah, that's
I get goosebumps. I can't help telling you that.
That's the framework from the 6 forward windows of Columbia.
And there's still pine needles in it, Terry.
Yes. And I had hundreds of hours working on those windows.
Did you?
Yes.
Every window, every flight was taken out and inspected, right?
No, it was inspected in place, but
okay.
if it had a ding of a significant size, then we replaced the window.
Now,
but for a long time, we polished the windows. So, yep, I think Marty has a question for us.
Well, this, of course, is the Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex,
Yeah.
Where they have, which was what we did last year, was we took you there and went down the 7 displays they had of each astronaut, and because of Terry's willingness to talk about this,
Yeah.
first time we've done this in 3 years to
Yeah.
talk about the tragedy in this way
And
with people. So
and the left-hand picture is part of the sidewall from Challenger, and that was picked up from the bottom of the ocean and brought back along with a lot of other pieces of Challenger that as part of the investigation. And it's odd that the piece is in the lower right-hand corner, right next to the red stripe on the flag, is a piece where there was a flexible insulation blanket. Challenger wasn't built with blankets on them.
I see that.
Yeah, and so those were test blankets. That was one of the locations we put test blankets on to fly them before we outfitted Discovery. Discovery was being built, and when we started putting those test blankets on just to see how they would function.
Is the blanket still there? Or was it
No,
ripped
no,
off?
it's
It did get
all the
ripped off.
cloth material is gone except the bottom layer that is actually
see.
glued to the ship. It's still there.
I'll look at that with a renewed interest as we talk a lot about the blankets. When you see Atlantis, you're like, wait a minute, it's covered in quilts.
Yes.
And
that was the
and
first-
not tiles. And
That was the first quilts to fly to
Wow.
space. So they put them through a high-speed lab, but that was the
25th shuttle
test.
launch on the left-hand side, the 113th shuttle launch on the right-hand side. It was called 107. They launches. Why'd they get out of sequence, Terry?
They assign launches in order as they are planning them. Different things change schedule-wise. So, if a payload's not ready, they don't rename that mission. That still keeps that. So sometimes you launch 107 after 108.
Yeah, it gets very jumbled up there.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're a researcher
but-
like me and trying to find,
but
where is it? Oh my gosh, they launched 5 before that number. Sometimes, it's
but
really,
you just can't go change, and say, okay, we'll stick something else in. It doesn't work that way. That payload has been planned for a long time,
Right.
and if there's a hiccup in the payload, then that flight just goes on hold.
well, there's hundreds of people, thousands of people involved with it. You
Yes.
can't change the number; they'll confuse them what the heck you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
and the financing.
Yeah,
It's all based on the funding
Oh.
for that particular one. So,
clear trail. Of
yes,
it.
yes, yeah.
Marty, you have a question from one of our Stay Curious watchers.
Yeah, we have a question from Amanda Chambers. I think you know her. Terry?
Yes, she's my niece.
He says Mason, 7 years old, wants to know how fast a shuttle can go.
Okay,
Great question, Mason.
okay, it flies 5 miles a second.
Once in orbit.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it has to get that fast to get to space. So, yep. So,
Think of your grocery store, maybe it's 5 miles away,
Yeah.
or your bank. Bingo. 1 second, you're there.
yep. So,
Another way to say that, Terry, is every heartbeat you go 5 miles.
correct.
Oh,
Yes.
that's a good way to
Yep.
put it.
Yep.
To a healthy heart like Marty's there. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it takes a lot of power to get it to space, but you have to get it to that speed to get there, and then you have to maintain that speed to stay in space, or otherwise, Mother Nature, called gravity, will bring you back home.
But incredibly, this like 40 tons of spacecraft and fuel and stuff there at this picture behind us. How fast is it going right there?
It's already doing 100 miles an hour before it clears the top of the stack.
Wow. That's getting
And,
off the stack quick.
and to get to space, it will get up to 17,500 miles per hour.
Which is 5 miles and 1 heartbeat there, Mason. Right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mason watching it there. So great question there. And if you have any more questions to Terry, he's got a few of his own he brought in here.
His brother Jackson has a question.
All right. Well, let's look at.
I understand he's been slipping on his homework, so his question is, do astronauts have to do homework? Yes,
Well.
they do. A matter of fact, when a person gets selected to be an astronaut, they go through a 2-year period of training before they're ever assigned a mission. So they have to learn a lot while they're on that 2-year period. Then once they get assigned a mission and a crew, then they train together as a crew. And there's a lot of homework because there's only so much stuff you can do at work, but then they do their training all around the world. They go to survival schools. They go to, if there's Russian payloads involved, they go to Russia. They go all over the world to train for that particular mission and that's when they really miss their own family, because they become a family of the crew members
Mhm.
because they work long days practicing and that, and they don't get to spend a lot of time with their own family.
Let me tell Jackson and Mason a tip that I got from astronaut John Blaha, who a young person asked him, "What's the most important thing about becoming an astronaut?" And Blaha says, "Well, get your science, get all this stuff. Everyone's going to tell you that education, but you've got to remember all this stuff. And so if you don't have a good memory, what good is it?" So he tells young people, Jackson and Mason, practice 30 minutes every day, improving your memory. He said people would say to him, "You've got a photographic memory." He said, "I worked hard for that. It didn't come naturally." So what was suggested is 30 minutes you read something for 15 minutes. Just take a 30-minute block, read it for 15 minutes, and then sit there for 15 minutes and try to regurgitate everything you can and go back and see what you can't in there. And he goes, pretty soon you're going to have a good memory on there. Now, it doesn't work over 65. Okay, I'll tell you that right now. Or maybe even over 60. But have you ever heard that before from an astronaut? He said, you got to train your mind to remember these things.
Yes, and especially remember a lot of the things you learned when you were younger in that. One astronaut was telling me he used to help his grandfather in his garage work on different tools and pieces of equipment and his grandfather showed him a trick and he says, "No one else will ever show you this, but when you run into a case like this, you do it this way and this is how it will all go together." And he thought, "Oh, that was pretty neat." But then it slipped way back in his memory. Well, he was out in space on a spacewalk assembling a piece of hardware.
Who's this again?
I forget which astronaut it was, but
Steve Smith.
Assembling this hardware and it wouldn't go together. So the cameras are filming what he's doing and they're looking at it, and all these engineers on the ground are offering him all these suggestions and that, and he's getting frustrated that it won't work. And he said, "Grandpa taught me how to fix this." And he fixed it according to his grandfather's instructions from when he was a kid, and it worked. And all of a sudden, they're all asking, "Well, what did you do? How did you do that?" He said, "Look, it's together. It worked. I'll explain it when I get back on the ground." And so he said, things you learn when you're younger, don't forget them because you may need them later in life.
There you go. Mind over matter.
And for homework, find a way to make it fun.
There you go, Jackson.
Yeah,
Mason.
when Rebecca and Travis were growing up and they had to memorize things that they found was hard, they put it to a tune. So then they could sing it like a song and they could remember what it was, because people remember songs real easy. They don't always remember text. So if you can put the words into a song, then it will come back to you.
Well, that's great. Some good stuff there. We're going to get into that's important to being an astronaut. And thank you, Terry, for that. We wanted to show the mission logo, which of the 135 patches in the three-decade space shuttle era, this is the only one that is the outline of the shuttle. Pretty cool about that. We talked about the symbolism of it there. It was a microgravity experiment. That's the astronaut pin there. This mission in the Space Hab really pioneered a lot of things being done right now in the International Space Station, no doubt about it. And the science was gathered after the 16-day mission. As I show the crew here, tell us about that. There's our crew there at the White Room during some sort of
probably a launch practice. So yeah,
that when they'd wore the terminal countdown test. Is that what you call them?
Yes.
They'd been wearing their spacesuits for that.
Yeah,
right?
they would. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
This is and this is they're just in their blue flight suits, so they would come out and go. There was other tasks that they did in there that they would participate as a crew, but sometimes it was just a photo op. They wanted some photographs of the crew around the vehicle and that, so they would.
Left to right at the bottom is Elon Ramon, Israel's only astronaut. William McCool is the pilot. David Brown there, Doc Brown, the first astronaut to go up that was a doctor.
Yeah.
He was a Doctor of the Year in the Navy. Laurel Clark above there, her first mission. Rick Husband, the commander behind Laurel's on his second flight. Kalpana Chawla, her second flight, proud native of India. And Michael Anderson there, mission payload specialist there. Michael Anderson making his second flight to space. So you had three veterans and 4 rookies there, and streets, buildings, asteroids, you name it, have been named after these, including, we're going to show you here in a minute, or towards the end of the show, a couple things on Mars on our Columbia heroes there. Beautiful liftoff that Marty's got back here in there, so on our green screen. So here's a little trivia tidbit for all you shuttle aficionados out there. What is the only odd feature of this orbiter there on the tarmac of the OPF, it looks like?
Easily recognizable difference between Columbia and the other 4 orbiters that flew into space.
And has anybody got a comment on that?
Nope.
All right. Tell them, Terry.
Columbia is the only one that has black on the upper wing.
Yeah, use your hand, or Marty will point it out there.
Yeah,
I get messed up all the time too.
Which is the wing glove. So all the rest of them were white, but before STS-1, they came down and they said, we need you to go up and use high temperature paint and paint the upper wing black in the area where it's thinnest. And then I questioned that, well, what are we doing that for? And they said, well, we're concerned about the orbiter side away from the sun is a negative 240 degrees. The side toward the sun is a plus 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So they were concerned about the temperature differential in the thin part of the wing. So they said, we want you to paint it black. So before they re-enter, they'll roll the orbiter, face the sun, heat up that portion of the wing to make it nice and hot, because the underside is going to get real hot when it re-enters. Well, we did it. Turns out that it wasn't a problem, so we didn't have to do it to any of the other orbiters. But anytime you see a shot, a picture of one, and you'll say, okay, well, that's Discovery. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's got the black wings. That's Columbia. So
You taught me to notice that. So you painted that, huh?
Yes.
Did you use rollers or
Yes.
a brush?
Yes, no, we use rollers
Okay.
and brushes, but there's a lot of areas on the orbiter, all the American flag, the names, the United
What was the
States, and all that.
substance it was painted on there?
Well, that's
Like
is painted on the frizzy, the felt reusable surface
Yeah.
insulation. Yeah,
But we just
because
want off-the-shelf black
yeah,
paint.
and white tiles, because then we didn't have the blankets. That was for the first flight.
Right. All right, a question there, Marty.
Well, first a comment. Mark Usiak got the answer correct.
All right,
Okay.
Mark.
And Steve J says, what about the SILTS, the SILTS pod?
Okay,
None of the others had that either.
that's right. If you look at the very tip of the vertical,
Good. That's Steve Jokums.
yeah, it just doesn't show real well in a lot of pictures. But you see that bulb at the top, the cylinder like on the very top of the vertical.
Oh yeah.
That was a silt pod.
At the top.
It was no longer
under
used,
vertical stabilizer.
but we had no reason or time in the flows to take the whole portion off and
Go
put
back
the
to
original tail portion back on. It's on the very top of the vertical stabilizer.
For some reason, I can't move the arrow.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay,
There we go.
all the way up on the very top,
Yeah.
up higher. Yep, that's it. That's the silts pod. So, yeah.
They have a camera in there.
And no, it was a device that registered something. It's slipping my mind right now what it was, but yeah, it had been disconnected and not used. So
Good
Yep.
one, Steve Jokums. He's at the Lake County Spaceport up there in Illinois.
and he probably
And,
knows what SILTS, what SILT stands
Yeah.
for. It's an abbreviation. So yeah.
Let us know if you got that abbreviation. But he is his business, side business, is modeling
Okay.
and decals for models up there, and he's a good contributor to our museum here. Give you an idea how Columbia was processed in the tight fit in the orbital processing facility with different levels there.
And what it looked like when it first arrived at Kennedy Space
Yeah,
Center. They
that's-
had not completed it. So if you look at all that green, that was areas that Palmdale had never put the tiles on. So we had to do all that work here. And then we had to remove all the tiles that they had put on because of a hardening issue. So
Yes, it was came in '79, flew April '81. So a lot of work to do on that. Marty, you got the answer there?
Yes, I do. It's the shuttle infrared lee side temperature sensing.
yes, infrared.
Infrared
detection.
temperature. Well, that
Yeah.
makes sense to be up high there to
Yeah.
gauge what's going on in the orbiter and so forth. Well, I'm clearing away here to bring in this orbiter so Terry can kind of give us an explanation. By the way, this is signed by about 15 astronauts there. You'll be able to buy this on our auction one day. All right. I see Wendy there, Don Thomas, Bruce Heeb. But using this model, Terry, and I'll hold it, demonstrate for us. So here, you could use maybe this stir stick there, if you could see that. For those of you that don't know exactly the scenario that happened on launch day, January, what was it, the 12th? Was the launch day? I can consult my
that's about right. Yeah. So at any rate, the external tank is nothing more. Well, it's more than that, but it's basically a thin aluminum bottle, and it holds extremely cold liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So you have to insulate the tank, otherwise it will form ice on the outside, and at the vibrational launch and that, all that ice would fall off and potentially damage the orbiter. So they put insulation on there. Well, they were having a hard time with the insulation sticking up by the front bipod. It was not adhering to the aluminum and staying on. We'd been picking pieces of insulation out for many years, but in this case of STS-107, a large piece came off. It came back and hit the leading edge of the wing right here, and it knocked a large hole in the reinforced carbon-carbon. All the experts said you cannot damage the carbon-carbon. They thought it had hit rotated around a little bit. They thought it had hit the underside of the wing and damaged a bunch of tiles. So they said we would have structural issues. We would have a lot of work to do when it came back. But the experts said it was not a major concern.
Now, this was on film and so forth at the launch.
But for the film and the angle, all you could see is the foam hitting and the foam disintegrating. But they did not think it had hit the gray material. At any rate, we questioned why they didn't go photograph it with satellites that we had up there, and they said the satellites were all busy with the Gulf War at the time, so they could not release them to go look at that. But there's no way that the crew could see it because the payload bay doors are open when they're in flight, and they can't look down and see that portion of the wing. So it
demonstrated over there more, Terry, with that one.
So. Yeah, so the crew only has limited visibility outside the vehicle. So, from inside the crew module here, there's no way they could see my finger where they needed to see. The doors are blocking the view. As soon as they close the doors, then they have no window to access there. Okay, they have two windows in the aft bulkhead of the crew module that can look out into the payload bay.
You're pointing about where the impact is there.
Yep. So, at any rate, that impact let that superheated plasma get inside the wing. It melted the wing from the inside out, caused the wing to come apart and come up, and created so much drag, it turned the orbiter sideways, and it's not designed to fly sideways, so it literally tore it apart. It didn't explode, it just literally tore it to pieces.
So where was the remote control arm?
Inside, but it didn't have the ability to go out and look at that. Okay. After that, we did. We had the arm, and then we installed the boom on future flights, and the arm would pick up the boom, and they could not only go out and look at that, they could go and look all the way underneath.
I wonder if it was even used. It wasn't needed on this mission.
It may not even have been in there. I forget whether it was in there or not. So, yeah,
I'm looking into that. I thought about that. I don't think it had one. They could certainly see that wing from there. We've seen pictures of astronaut EVAs.
Yeah, remember a lot of them, though, it's the boom arm combination. So,
you made we have a comment there, Marty.
Well, we have a comment and a question and a question. Mark Usiak is asking, what mission was the first flight for the Silt? It was not for the early.
No, it was not. I don't recall which flight.
Well, CJ is saying it was after STS-9.
Okay.
So I don't know if that means it was STS-10. I don't know.
What STS-9 was?
He said it was after 9, so it
STS-9.
doesn't know when it was 10. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And then Doug Forrest just asked a question about the arm to look at the damage in the wing, but you just answered that question.
Okay.
Great. We need to check. I don't think the arm was in play on there. I wonder if they even sent it up there for weight. But these are details 21 years later we're still talking about. And,
Yeah, see, and that was a space lab mission. So all their stuff was done in the laboratory, so they weren't doing anything.
Yeah, there's no need for an arm on there.
Yeah. I think if they had an EVA suit, they only had one, but, with the tunnel hooked up to go to the lab, they don't have the easy way to get out to do a spacewalk.
Right, and this does show the configuration of a space lab in there. And so you couldn't get out the tunnel. You have to come out the hab, and you couldn't do that. I don't think there's capability to do that. But fascinating. Thank you for your questions there and following us here. Terry White is going to talk a little more about he just told you why it happened. So they stayed up there and had a successful mission, really, didn't they?
Correct. Yeah. And then, and then when we lost the orbiter and we went out to recover it in Texas, first thing I want to comment on, I don't know if any other part of the country, if those people would have treated us as nice as those people in East Texas did. They went out of their way to take care of us. They offered us rooms in their houses. They offered us food. They did everything they could do. We had people that were out searching every day, 7 days a week and that. They'd come back, and the people running the hotel where they were staying offered to go, get them the clothes they needed because they were wearing out clothes with all the briars and everything they were doing and that. So it was a great community out there that pitched in. And early on, it was all volunteers that were out there searching. There was military, there was ROTC from colleges there. There was, of course, the Kennedy Space Center and the Johnson Space Center employees that were there to assist in looking and that. But just the National Guard was out all searching that. Then eventually we brought in the U.S. Forestry Service, the actual firefighters. This is not fire season, so they were available. They come with 100% support. When they show up, they have their own accommodations, which is tents, but they have everything they need to take care of. They have their food, they have shower facilities, everything. They don't rely on anything because they're used to going out in remote areas and fighting forest fires and that. So, and they respond at the drop of a hat. So as soon as they said they needed them, they showed up. And then we tried to get the military helicopters to search, and they wouldn't fly as low and as slow as we did. So they brought in the forestry helicopters, the ones that used to pick up the tanks of water to drop on forest fires and that, and to move firefighters from one location to another. So they said, we need people who are familiar with helicopters or want to fly on helicopters to search. And I said, I flew air rescue in the Air Force. I can do that. So I showed up, flew on a helicopter one day, was explaining to the pilot and the crew I was flying with how they needed to fly to search and that. The next day I showed up, and the people in charge said, by the way, you are now in charge of the helicopters. Oh, wow. So eventually I had 37 helicopters flying.
What kind of helicopters?
They were a variety of helicopters, but they were all small in that. Some of them were French helicopters, U.S., similar to Huey's, and that had a lot of former Vietnam helicopter pilots that were flying for us and that. But yeah, so other pilots were ones that flew helicopters out to the oil rigs and that. But a lot of good experienced pilots and that, and crew. And then it was a matter of training them on what to look for and to find. But yeah, so it was the largest search effort ever conducted in the continental United States. Our primary debris path was 250 miles long by 10 miles wide.
Let's look at that here.
Yep.
We're jumping around there.
Yeah. And so we searched areas outside the primary path. When we would find something or someone would call in a thing, and we were evaluating all the parts when we brought them in to see if we needed more concentrated effort. But with the helicopters, we searched 10 miles wide. With the ground troops, elbow to elbow, they walked everything from the center line 1 mile on either side. So that was 2 miles wide that they searched that whole debris path down there. And all those little indications are major debris pieces that we found.
Incredible story. It's told in 2 books that I really have enjoyed. Of course, Mike Lombach and Jonathan Ward wrote Bringing Columbia Home. And we'll have Mike on the show Friday with your questions and answers. And he will not shy away from any questions about Columbia, I'll tell you
Correct.
that. And then this little book that we have here in our museum that we'll be offering for your donations, The Silence and the Salvage by Mr. Lamar Russell, who I've tried to get a hold of to be on our show from time to time. A short little read that really explains to you how people like Terry and the workers out there immobilized immediately. The accident happened at in the morning, like 9 o'clock.
Yep, go home, pack your bags, and get right back to the runway.
Kiss your wives goodbye and your girlfriends, and at 6
Or your
o'clock,
husbands. Some of them were females.
Yeah, at 6 o'clock, the mass exodus out there started. And what is very fascinating that this book points out here by Mr. Russell is this was February 2003. In January 2003, the Gulf War had started.
Correct.
And where is the biggest base for B-52 bombers in our country?
They're in Barksdale.
And that was your command headquarters for this briefing.
Yep, that's what
So
I
how
set
was
up.
that to deal with those Air Force generals and a war that they were starting to implement?
Personally, I didn't have any issues. Other people were, because I was former Air Force and at a B-52 base in 1968, so I knew, how things were carried on at a SAC base. But other people had a hard time with the military. Had certain ways of doing things, and you're going to do it their way, or you're going to be kissing the pavement with an M16 in the back of your neck. So
they actually had a red line.
Oh, yes.
Lines where you
it's
weren't
called,
allowed to
it's
walk.
called a no-loan zone. You don't cross that line, even if you are authorized to cross that line. You don't cross by yourself. It's at least two people, but you don't cross it unless you have permission, no matter who you are.
What was that like to hear these planes roaring out in the middle of the night and stuff like that while you had these helicopters in your command?
Yeah. Well, the helicopters, we didn't take off till first thing in the morning. So that was down at Lufkin, Texas, and another place. But yeah, the B-52s. I don't know. I spent 4 years in the Air Force. I was used to the loud noises at night taking off. So yeah, it didn't bother me.
Which astronaut was a B-52 pilot?
I do not recall.
Tom Jones.
Oh, okay. That's
the
right.
pilot, right,
That's
Marty?
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. He's wrote a book about the B-52 group out there. So we just saw Tom had lunch with him Friday. Name dropping, aren't we, Marty? But what a great guy, and he wants to be involved with our museum.
So this was pretty interesting because we had a lot of places to operate out of in the beginning, and then we scaled back some, and you see some of them here on Nacogdoches and Hemp Hill, and we found a lot of parts for the crew module and that down in the Hemp Hill area. But
did you?
Yeah.
And
but
where was the farthest things that you found there in
all
Louisiana?
all the way into Fort Polk in Louisiana, because I flew down there like I was talking about on Air Force helicopter to go look at where the turbo pumps went in, and I asked the forestry guy that found them, I said, how did you find these? Because it was way out in the woods and that. And he said, well, he was out riding on a four-wheeler looking because they had picked it up on the base's radar. They had seen them coming in, but theirs was a sweeping radar. So all it did when it came around, it could see it. Then the next time it came around, it was gone. So they didn't know exactly where it was. He said, so he's searching these, again, February, and he's riding through the woods, and he looks, and there's mud splattered all up on the trees and mud on top of the leaves. And he said, wrong time of year to have mud on top. Leaves are covering everything. So he got off his four-wheeler, was walking around, opened the bushes, and there's a huge 14-foot deep, 13-foot diameter hole in the ground with a piece of shiny metal at the bottom, and it's filling in with water. And he said, this is what we must be looking for. So yeah, so it was about the size of a beer keg, the turbo pump, and it had gone in, and it was the streaks that if you look at the film of Columbia breaking apart, you'll see 3 streaks going way out ahead of the other parts, and that was those turbo pumps, and they
heaviest, most energy coming in.
Yeah, and compact, and they found them on Fort Polk. So, and the people at Fort Polk, again, they're all geared up for the Gulf War, and they hear the sonic booms from these pieces, but they said, wait a minute, this is a Saturday. they're not firing artillery on Saturday, even with the war going on. They're not firing artillery here on Saturday. So they were trying to figure out what it was, and then they were told it was parts of the orbiter coming in.
Well, we chose today not to show any of the tragic moments that you're all familiar with, the streaks across the sky. You can find them everywhere, but we really can't completely tell the story without showing a couple pictures like this, Terry.
Yes, that's the hangar. Once we picked up all the pieces, and the federal safety people and that evaluate aircraft crashes and that, and they said based on the height, the altitude, and the speed that Columbia broke apart, they said we would never find 15% of the vehicle. And it's in wood, lakes, marsh, mud, and that. But the last time I unloaded parts coming out of Texas, and they still continue to find parts in Texas now, is we had recovered over 45% of the vehicle.
Here's an interesting aerial shot, probably early in the recovery, if we recovered 45% of it. But explain what the grid, what's going on.
Well, there's more of it that they don't show out, but they gridded out the pattern of the underside of the orbiter, and as they recovered, when we got it back here and identified pieces, they laid them out exactly where they were supposed to go. On the far right and the far left, they set up racks to hold the reinforced carbon, and you can see the right wing, there was a lot of pieces of reinforced carbon recovered. On the left wing, there was not a lot recovered. So and all of the indication from all the structure damage and everything else came through. And surprisingly enough, we found a lot of tiles that how they got that superheated, I don't know, after they broke apart, but they had literally, the silica had melted to a liquid, and then when it cooled down, it solidified. So these were silica icicles.
Wow.
Sticking out of the tiles, and I had never seen anything like that. So I don't know exactly what temperature those tiles reached to do that, but we picked up individual tiles. We picked up panels that had a lot of tiles on it. You could see the window frames right there, and the amount of tiles still around. That happens to be the observation window, not the forward crew windows that you see right there in the
above the top up
there. Yeah. So, but all the pieces laid out there on the floor, laid them out in their respected areas, and then they invited Kennedy Space Center employees to bring their families out if they wanted to go out and look at that. So I took my wife and 2 kids out there, and we walked through and looked at all the pieces there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like the loss of anything, the closure is a human condition that we have to go through. So.
Well, and that's what was so important to the technicians that worked on it, and the engineers and the quality that worked on it every day, was for closure, they had to recover it, and they didn't want to be doing that, but they had to go out and recover it, and they had to help figure out what happened and get it all fixed and get back to flying again. That was their dedication. They were out there, like I say, 7 days a week, out there tromping in the mud and the rain and the snow. I mean, first day I was flying the helicopter, had the doors open for better visibility and that. And I was leaning out the open door, watching on the ground and that. And we landed after 2 hours to refuel. And the pilot and the aircraft manager are walking along stamping their feet. They said, "Man, our feet are about frozen." I said, "Oh, not my feet, but my shoulder is totally frozen," because I was leaning out the door the whole time flying along. And it was spitting snow. There was a lot of days it was spitting snow.
Weather was you didn't have many good weather days during this. But how long did this happen?
The recovery wound up, I think it was late May when they pulled most of it out. But like I said, they're still recovering stuff. And they asked me one day, they said, "How do we keep getting the message out to people, once it's no longer big news?" And that I said, "Well, anywhere that people buy hunting license, fishing license and that," I said, put a thing up there that tells them, if you see something like this, record the coordinates if you can, but notify the sheriff's department and that, and we'll send somebody out there to get it. And they turn around in Texas, put it right on the hunting and fishing license.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. Yep.
Huh.
So.
That's interesting. Of course, as we looked at the trajectory, it missed any major cities. It could have been really.
It did. It came down through the roofs of schools, but no one was at school on a Saturday in that. It didn't hit any people.
Some pieces were on golf courses.
Oh yeah. And the closest I heard it coming to, there was a guy hooking up a lowboy. That's a trailer behind a semi-tractor, getting ready to install a piece of farm equipment on it. And he said that he was sitting in the truck, and all of a sudden he felt a big wham. And he goes, what the heck? I wasn't moving. I didn't hit anything. He got out and looked. There was a piece of structure stuck right through the bed of his truck.
Oh, whoa. Huh.
So, yeah.
21 years ago, and we're glad that Mark Usiak's watching today in Pennsylvania. Rebecca Vicknar, your daughter's watching there with
and
her.
while you're saying
kid.
her name, I have to do a shout out to Lane and Riley and Renee and Lon Jr. So I told them I would wave at them today.
All right. Eat your boudin, kids. Grandpa brought me some nice spicy boudin from the last trip up there, and I've been enjoying it. And we've got some gumbo in the freezer back there I'm going to share. Thank you for that. Dave Stangy's watching. Dave, thank you. I know he might have a question there, Marty, but I know he's enjoying this thoroughly. Gary Gerald, our Vidalia and peanut farmer up there in Collins, Georgia. Cliff Watson is enjoying summertime in Pomona, Australia. He'll be here in April for the eclipse.
Yeah.
Sitting right there in your chair. In fact, can't wait to get you in here, Cliff, and let everybody meet you. Cynthia Rossi, good that you're watching. Bill Whiting's watching.
Amanda Chambers, that's the questions we answered for her boys.
Great.
About homework and that.
Doug Forrest, Steve J., Tom Celentano's up there in Hartford, Connecticut.
And now I have one other question that I was asked to discuss.
Sure.
To pass, and it has to do with recovery. So after we left Fort Polk, we flew over to Lufkin to the command center in Texas. Okay. And we went down there to talk to the people who were working there. And the place was full there was Border Patrol. There was so many county sheriff's offices set up in there. There was that. And when we walked in, the guys that knew me looked at me and says, "Don't you feel a little naked?" I said, "Why?" They said, "Everybody in this room is packing except you." Everybody was armed because they were all law enforcement. There was Texas Rangers, there was Highway Patrol, Sheriff's Department, that. So at any rate, so they're introducing us to a few people there, and Mike Leinbach was with me and that. And so this major for the Sheriff's Department says, "Hey, I got somebody I want you guys to meet. He's real busy, but he's got a minute." So he brought over the sheriff from Angelina County. And he says, yeah, so we introduced ourselves in that. And so the sheriff says, "I'd like to stick around and talk to you guys, but I've got a lot of things on my plate, so I have to leave." And this guy looks just like you would picture a small community sheriff to look like. He had his Stetson on.
Uh-huh.
He had on, they were light colored jeans, but cowboy boots, big belt buckle on that. He had a suede jacket with the suede patches on there and a string tie, but really nice guy. And he starts to walk away and he says, "Wait a second." And he reaches in and he brings out a business card and he hands it to me. He doesn't hand one to anyone else. He says, "If you need anything, call me." I said, "Okay, thanks." So I put it in my pocket, not thinking anything about it. So he leaves and the major looks at me and he says, "Can I see that business card?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." I hand it to him and looks at it. He says, "Just who the heck are you?" I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "This is not his regular business card." He said, "This won't get you the sheriff's department. This is his personal number." He said, "You call this number, the only one who will answer is him." He said, "What kind of trouble are you going to get into?" And I said, "Well, I wasn't planning on any." He said, "Well, this is a get out of jail free card in any county in the state of Texas."
Wow.
And everybody else who was with me looks at me and says, "Might have known he'd have given it to you."
That's a good one. Yeah, the generosity of Texas. My sister lives in San Angelo with her husband, Jerry. I always love going to Texas, and they have an attitude. They're for darn sure about that. But you know what? You know that whatever they're saying is straight, narrow, and true about stuff in there. Terry, we've really enjoyed this. Marty, if we got any other questions, let me know there. Thank you for being so open to talk about this. It's not always easy for people to look back on these tragedies. You get 2 decades past them. The hurt and your private moments, I'm sure, is still there. These were your friends, these 7 astronauts. You knew them. They were around your
Yes.
your people and where you worked, and it's just like anybody losing somebody that works at your factory, your business, your whatever.
And
You might not know where exactly they live and so forth.
yeah,
but
but
they
people were picking up parts that they knew personally they had installed. And one of them, I was assisting him because he said, I know there's some stuff in this one area, but I can't get any of the search teams to come out. And I said, okay. So I said, I'll drive out there and you and I will go. So it was a Sunday afternoon, and I went over there and met with him, and we went out there, and it was a hunting camp. And the guy said, yeah, we were here on Saturday, and we heard noises coming over. It's just, and I said, well, they found a piece of wing not very far from your camp, and that's what you heard spinning as it came over. And so we walked out behind theirs, and the pines were super thick and that, but we walked through, and I found a couple of pieces of structure, and cause everybody wanted to crowd. I said, no, stay where you're at. And we weren't elbow to elbow. We were about 15 feet apart walking through there. And then we found part of one of it was either the pilot or the commander's seat. And the guy that had asked me to come out and help him was one of our spacecraft operators. He's one of the technicians that sits there the whole time we're on the ground getting the vehicle ready. He's flying the orbiter when it's on the ground. So he has more time in those seats than any astronaut. So, when he picked up that piece of seat, that meant a lot to him because he'd been in that seat for hours and hours. So I said, well, it's late in the day. We don't need to look anymore. We need to have an elbow to elbow team come through here. And then we found the helium tank to the forward reactionary control system. Yeah, the inside helium tank from in here. So it was intact. It had come down and broke limbs of that as it hit the ground and made a big dent in the ground, but it was still intact.
No, that's the yellow underneath.
Yeah,
in there.
yeah. So
and the nose.
yeah,
there.
so we picked it up and carried it out of the woods, but then we sent a team in there to find, and they did find human remains later on. But yeah, so
Native Americans were important to the search there.
yes, a lot of the forestry firefighters were Native Americans, and they came from all over the place, and but they could only come for 3 weeks. That's the same way when they fight fires. They can do 3 weeks online, and then they have to come offline. So
right.
Same thing with our helicopter pilots. They could only fly for 3 weeks, and then they had to back off. So.
Well, I mentioned that just hundreds of things to memorialize our fallen heroes, and would you believe there's 7 hills on the surface of Mars that were renamed the Columbia complex after each one of them. And then this is Spirit rover went up to those mountains, those mounds up there. I think that's kind of cool. And also there's many memorials like this on NASA spacecraft. This one on a rover on Mars. Obviously after it had just landed or it'd be covered with red dust there. But these are tributes, Terry, that, is the only way outsiders like myself can say we care.
Yeah.
About that. So wanted to end on one, the Columbia, unlike Challenger's in a silo out on the Cape Canaveral property, I believe.
It is.
And where's Columbia at here? The sign there shows the floor it's on, or?
Yeah. Columbia's up on a floor, the 16th or the 20th. I think it's the 16th floor in the vehicle assembly building. Not all of it is there, but a lot of it is there, but they actually have things on display up there. So
and lessons learned. It's an important lesson.
So
learned.
They could take people up there and show them that. And they actually, use some of the things from Columbia. They loan them out to different universities and to different companies to understand what happened in a high-speed breakup of a vehicle like that, so they can help for the future design of vehicles.
At least 5,000 miles an hour it was going in that vicinity.
Yeah, it was going a lot faster than that still. Yeah.
There was not much to be, left, but still there were some things like Elon Ramon's diary, part of it survived.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. Some of the things we picked up out of the woods, the pages from the manuals were intact. I mean, they had watermarks on them from the rain or a little bit of mud, but and then something you knew that was less than 2 feet away from them in the crew module. One of them was their gyro binoculars, and when we picked that up, they'd been sheared through the lengthwise, almost like you cut them with a saw.
Wow.
Yeah, and then we'd pick up parts of some of the guys that worked the aft of the vehicle, and that they picked up pieces of titanium that was the major thrust structure that held the engines and everything together. And they said, you can't do this to a piece of titanium. It was literally ripped. And I said, Mother Nature can. I said, the forces that it saw, we can only imagine, but it ripped it apart. And it was just amazing. Oh, and one thing we found from the crew module, that little instrument they use when they do the puff of air in your eyes when they're doing a glaucoma test, I think is what it is. Yeah. That was still in the box. Took it out of the box. It worked just fine, but things right next to them were totally destroyed. So,
Marty, you had another person that was watching today, Peggy Herbert. Thank you, Peggy.
My sister that lives here in Wendover. So,
all right, Peggy. Thank you so much there for watching today. Terry, it's hard to put a positive spin on this tragedy 2 decades later, but there is one story I think would be appropriate for you to share going out with, and that's about ice cream. Because, if a lot of us know as kids or adults even, if you're mad about something or you're depressed or whatever, eat some ice cream because you can't stay mad about ice cream. And ice cream, I think, played an interesting role in the morale of the workers out there. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, but one ice cream story is a Jerry Ross story. Did he ever tell you that one?
No, I'm talking about the Bluebell.
Oh, out in Texas. Yeah,
out in Texas.
Yeah, we had all kinds of companies start funneling in food, and we had different things like Americans Veterans and different ones like that. They opened up their facilities and cooked for all these volunteers and that. They come and, they had an assembly line of food going out there and that. But, they were backing up semi-loads of chicken, semi-loads of beef and everything to do that. But Bluebell Ice Cream was donating ice cream, and then Bluebell Ice Cream wasn't this side of the Mississippi. It was still out in the west. So they put, even once a lot of the volunteers were no longer there, every day they came and filled freezers at the command center in Lufkin, Texas with Bluebell ice cream. And some people were just waiting for it to go down there so they could get the banana popsicles and the different things like that. But that was my first taste of Bluebell. But it was pretty interesting. The one guy at McDonald's was donating sandwiches every morning, and that cooler's full of sandwiches for the people in that. But they were stopping it, and my air crew needed to get something to eat before they went out to fly. So they were, and so I went to the guy at McDonald's. I said, I hate to ask, but you were opening up earlier, now you're not, but the air crew guys have no other place to grab a bite to eat on their way, so they'd like to get a breakfast sandwich or something. He says, no problem. All they have to do is pull up and tell us who they are, and he would not charge for that. And he didn't charge for all the stuff he donated to the thing. And I was there one day talking to him and thanking him for doing that. And he said, it's odd. He says, because he said, I did that out of my own pocket. He said, McDonald's Corporation usually doesn't support stuff like this. He said, so I was paying for it out of my own pocket. And he says, when the company found out that I was doing it, they came back and reimbursed me for everything, but they said, don't tell anybody. So that was,
you won't tell anybody.
That was pretty good. So I got him and his daughter to come up to the command center, and John Harrington was the astronaut that was working with me that week.
Right.
And John walked him around, explained what was going on, thanked him for all they did and that, signed pictures for him. And then when it was done, they came to me and they said, oh, thanks for taking us up here, but we want your autograph. I said, wait a minute, I'm not the astronaut. No, we want your autograph. So
Bluebell ice cream, if you haven't tried it, do so. It's
homemade,
a full half gallon, not
homemade vanilla.
I love the vanilla. Oh my God!
It's the closest you get to actual homemade
just
ice
like
cream.
You were making it in the backyard there, and they anyway. Thank you for telling that part in there, Marty. You have a question there?
Yeah, we have a question from Mark Usiak. How did they find the video camera that was recording right before re-entry?
I don't know who recovered that, but I know most of the camera was intact. But what was odd is Columbia was the most instrumented vehicle. A lot of it was disconnected, but the part that was recorded was in a recorder that was inside the ship, so it wasn't sent back to the ground. So they did find it and retrieve that. So a lot of the data was still in that instrument. So Yeah, but I don't know. There was the search effort was so big in so many places, and before I started supervising the helicopter operations, I was going around talking to people because they said, "Hey, we sent these people out here and we didn't discuss anything with them except you're going to go search." So we didn't ask them how they felt about it or anything. So I had to go around and touch as many people as I could because I said I knew more people that out there than anyone else, and find out how they were doing, ask them what they needed, and then a lot of them it was, we need new clothes, we need boots, this, that, and the other. But a couple of them said, well, I need to talk to you over here. And they needed a shoulder to cry on. They didn't want anyone else to see them, but they just, had to talk to me for a minute, cry on my shoulder for a minute. And they said, I'm good to go. I'm going back to work. But it was emotional for a lot of people. But like I say, that was their baby and they wanted to recover it.
Did they have counselors out there?
No, they told me that we could get them, but they had a lot of counselors for government employees, not for contractors.
Okay.
Which later on, when a bunch of counselors came here and I was escorting them around in the OPF, they said, "Oh yeah, the counselors help out." I said, "We never saw them." I said, "What?" I said, "Nope. All your counselors only went to government employees, not to any of the United Space Alliance or the other contractor employees." So.
Well, it's a tragedy that will live on through NASA's history, NASA's darkest week here. We appreciate Terry sharing the facts of it with you. We make no light of any of the loss here, but I think you get the gist that the eighth loss was this beautiful orbiter here that was so personal, just like your personal car. Everybody's had a car that they didn't want to sell or got wrecked, and that was their baby, and that's OV-102 is certainly your baby.
Yep.
So, Marty, we have any other questions here before we go out?
We have one more for one of Amanda's boys, and I'll answer it on the next show because it's a little bit of a long answer. So.
Okay, we'll do that next time we come back next month. Marty?
Nope, we're good.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Terry. Do you have anything you wanted to say to our audience here that I know appreciates your expertise in there? Well, God bless you and all your friends. We know how heavy your heart is on February 1st every year.
So
just thinking about that Saturday morning.
Yeah, and remind people that this Sunday we have the
thank you.
The ceremony here in Titusville for anyone who's local that wants to come too.
That's the one slide I didn't rack up. We have Mike McCulley, pilot of STS-34 that deployed Galileo, but I think more importantly, the beloved leader of United Space Alliance as its CEO and president at the end of the shuttle era. Mike will be doing the honors there at Sandpoint Park, where the big bridge is, just to the north of our Spaceview Park. A beautiful ceremony, reverently remembering all 17 astronauts in a quick bio. Flowers are placed on the plaques over there that are around the flag memorial, and dignitaries will be there to honor our fallen heroes. And Terry will be there, I'm sure. So
yeah, and this is for all three vehicles that we lost. It's not just for Columbia.
Apollo 1, Challenger, and Columbia have people from all those programs will be there who witnessed these tragedies themselves and were greatly affected by it. So tomorrow we're going to talk about the Columbia tragedy from a structural engineering standpoint by Gary Allgaier. And he did Apollo 1 on Tuesday. Go back and check that out because he really brought some powerful lessons learned there. And I'm sure he'll have a lot of interesting aspects that you've never heard about Challenger, though we're looking at 38 years for the Challenger disaster. So again, thank you to our friend here, Terry White. Appreciate all he does to promote our museum outside of our studio set here. Mean that a lot, Terry, and to have your family now promoting us too. We appreciate that a lot. So thank you all for spending your time to being with us here today on Stay Curious. I'm Mark Marquette, and I can't wait to see you again to bridge the space between us.